In this lesson I'm going to go over 10 variations of the 1625 jazz turnaround. I'm going to talk a little bit about how you arrive at the variations, how you use them, and also how they're actually more the same than they're different. If you checked out my lesson on turnarounds, I think it's also in the one on rhythm changes, you'll know that I talk about how a turnaround is in fact just an embellished version of a 1-5 progression. So if we want to arrive at a 1625, we can start with the core of it, and that's just a 1 and a 5 chord. So that'd be something like this. And then the next thing will happen is that you add a 2 chord in front of the 5, so you get. Instead of playing a whole bar of 1, you'll play 1, and then you'll play a 6 in the second half. As you can tell, these chords are almost identical in terms of notes. Actually, there's only one note that's really changing, and that's the B is changed into an A. So for the rest, it's pretty much the same. And then you have the 1625. The first chord you want to change is probably the 6th degree, and that's also the most common one that you'll see. So we have C, A minor to D minor, and A to D is in fact also just like a dominant resolving to a tonic, so we can actually make that into a dominant. So we get an A7, and then you get this progression. And that's just because this resolution is stronger than this one. You can hear it if you play them after each other. The way you want to treat this A7 is that it's just a dominant, it's an auxiliary dominant in the key of C, and it's a dominant resolving to D minor. So you treat it as a dominant from a D minor scale, so in this case that would be the harmonic minor scale, so D harmonic minor, and that makes it an A7 with a flat 9 and a flat 13. A variation on the A7 is to play a C sharp diminished. And the reason you want to do that is because it gives you a nicer bass line, so you get this bass line. And the only difference is really, if you listen to like A7 like this and C sharp diminished, you can hear that they're very similar, they're more similar than they're different. And when you're soloing on it and when you're choosing extensions, you're kind of doing the same thing. So the C sharp diminished is also a chord that you would take from the D harmonic minor scale, and you will solo on it like that. You can actually just think A7 when you're soloing on it. So you get. And the only difference is kind of how you play the C sharp and the bass. It's just to get that bass line. Another place where you can change the bass note is on the first chord. So instead of playing C to A, you can change that into E minor. And the reason why I want to do that is because this bass line has a bit more direction than. And for the rest there's really very little difference. You can also tell that when I'm playing the E minor 7, I actually don't play a 9 on it, because the F sharp is not in the key of C. So of course you can, but it has to be a choice. So I would say, as a sort of rule of thumb, when you have a 3rd degree minor chord in a major scale, you don't want to put a 9 on it. And therefore this voicing. The next chord we can change is to take the last dominant and make that into an altered dominant. Then we get this progression. And you can hear how this wants to pull more towards this one than the one we had before without the alterations. And you can of course treat this G7 the same way as you treat the A7, so that it's a dominant that you borrowed from minor, and then you would be using C harmonic minor on it. Or you can also just think really G7 altered. I think I have lessons on both of those options that you can check out. So when we changed the C major 7 into an E minor 7, we made a progression that didn't want to stand still in the beginning and would want it to keep on moving. So the difference between and is that the one with the E really wants to keep moving. And we can do that and make that idea even stronger by playing them all as dominants, and then you get this. So if the melody allows that, then you can do that at the end of an A, because you really want to pull to the second A, or in another place in the form where it's important that even if the melody isn't really moving, then the harmony really wants to suggest that we're going on and we're going back to the root of the key. The next thing we can do to make this sense of forward motion in the progression even stronger is to start using tritone substitutions. So shortly, a tritone substitution is, if we have an E7, we can make a tritone substitution by using not the E7 chord, but the tritone, the one that's tritone away, because they share the same 3rd and 7th. I have a lesson on tritone substitutions that I'll link to here. If I use that in the progression, then we get this. And you can tell if you have a piece where you're expecting after, so the second line of an A, for instance, would be like. You have a much stronger pull towards the next A, because you get a bass note that's not in the key really, and it's a dominant, and everything is a dominant, and it's pulling forward all the time. So in that way you really have the feeling of a turnaround that's moving towards the next A, which can be useful sometimes. And we can of course do the same by using tritone substitution on the last dominant. So instead of playing G7 like this, we will use a D flat 7, so that would be this one, and then we get this progression. And if we make it to a chain of tritone substitutions, we could get this. And here I made a tritone substitution, so I have an E flat 7 instead of an A, and a D flat 7 instead of a G. Tritone substitutions, you usually play them as a sort of Lydian dominance, because they're not resolving down a fifth. But the E7 here, I'm playing an E7 altered, and you want to use a scale that's sort of close to C major in this case, because that's the key that all the turnarounds are in. And if I play this chord with as an E7 altered, actually most of these notes are found in C. So even though it's a chord that's really moving forward, and you can hear that it's a dominant and that it doesn't sit in the key, it still will have a lot of notes that sort of fit with the key. If I played a normal E7, probably it's going to clash with whatever is in the melody at that point, because then what's likely to be in the melody on a turnaround is something that's very C related, so something with a G, E, or a C. And they work on this one, but they don't really work on a normal E7. The last example is something that you could see as being on the way towards giant steps, and that's the ladybird turnaround. That's this one. And it kind of works because we still have the one chord really clearly, and then going to an E flat 7, well, that's just a tritone of an A, so that's also fairly common. But then we kind of let it lead its own life, and we change, so we don't go to a 2 chord, we really let this one resolve to an A flat major 7. And then we use the tritone of G, because that's sort of closely related to the A flat, even if it's not in the scale. And then we use that as a dominant to go back to C. So you find this in Ladybird, and you can find a lot of other pieces as well. It's used quite commonly on standards. If you check arrangements by Brad Melner, uses quite a lot, and also Peter Bernstein has it in a few of his standard renditions on albums. So just to relate this to giant steps, because I mentioned it, if we take the Ladybird turnaround, then after a bar we're in A flat, so that's down a major 3rd, and if we do the same from A flat, then we are in E, and that's of course again down a major 3rd, and then from there we can move back to C. So in that way, that's the giant step circle. That was 10 different turnarounds, and as you can see, you can easily make more different variations out of it, but they're going to be more the same than they're going to be different. And maybe that's also sort of an important thing that I talked about in the beginning of the lesson. you want to get used to just thinking of a turnaround as just being a turnaround. And then you can of course fill it in all sorts of ways, and you have to be able to play the different sorts and the different variations, like the ones I went over here. But at the same time, if you can sum up a piece as just being, for instance, 2 turnarounds and then cadence to the 4th degree and then another turnaround, like a rhythm A part, then it's easier to remember than remembering the individual chords. And sometimes it doesn't matter as much. It's more important that you just know, okay, it's 2 bars and it's a turnaround. And then however it's filled in is going to vary anyway, because maybe people are changing it while playing, or you're playing with somebody else and they have a different chart, so they just chose a dim chord instead of a dominant, something similar like this. And then that shouldn't really stop you that much. You want to have a grasp of the turnaround and also know the different versions of it, so that you can just get along with whatever is there. If you want me to make some examples of lines over these turnarounds, then leave that in a comment. I'm not going to make too many examples. Probably I'm going to make 3 examples. So you need to let me know also which ones you want to see, because there are 10 and I'm not going to make all of them. If this is the first time that you see one of my lessons, then you can of course subscribe to my channel if you want to stay up to date. I've been making lessons for more than 2 years now, and there's already really a lot of lessons on my YouTube channel to check out. And you can of course also go to my website and download a PDF of the examples that I went over here, if you want to study them away from the video. On my website you can also subscribe to my newsletter if you want to stay up to date with what is happening, if I'm putting something new up in my web store or playing somewhere, recording or something similar. If you have any ideas for topics or suggestions, comments or questions, then leave a comment on the video. I try to get back to everybody if I can. And you can also ask me by connecting with me on social media. So I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Google+. So connect with me there, and let me know if you have ideas for topics or questions or anything similar. That's about it for this week. Thank you for watching, and until next week.